Hello, Facebook and YouTube. Welcome as well. And of course, our dear friends on Zoom. Welcome. Hi, Rebecca from Palm Desert. Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Wow. Here we are in New York. Okay, friends, our penultimate class before the Pesach holidays begin. So let's jump straight in. We're going to talk about 15 steps to greatness. Before I jump into the actual Pesach Seder, which is obviously going to be the topic of this evening, there's one topic which I did not bring up, actually, in the many classes I've given in preparation for Pesach, and that is the 4 sons, the 4 children, the Arba Banim. I want to talk about them for a couple of moments, and we're going to plug them into the Seder because they are a big central feature of the Pesach Seder. I want to share with you a very beautiful and powerful idea, which really relates to these 4 sons and what they have to say and who they really are. We refer to them as 4 sons, but really they are 4 of the next generation. And we're told in the Haggadah, based upon words from the Torah, that there are 4 types of children that we are dealing with. And we're going to focus on kids because the entire Pesach experience is actually meant to be, if people have children, to be focused towards them. And if people do not have children in home anymore, or they are not at that part of their lives yet, then whoever is at your Pesach Seder become your children. That's the beauty of the Pesach Seder. And if a person is alone for the Pesach Seder, which many people are, last Pesach for sure, maybe even this Pesach, then you ask yourself questions and you speak to your own inner child and answer those questions as well. So what are these 4 Jews that we're going to be talking about? The first one is the Chacham, the wise child. The second is the Rasha, not good child, evil child. Next is the Tam, the simple child. And the last one is the Eno Yodeh L'Shal, the child who does not know how to ask questions. And all 4 of them are engaged in the Pesach Seder different ways. The Chacham, the wise. Now, what would you expect from a wise child? An answer, right? And the answer is no. For us, it doesn't work that way. For us, the wise child, the wise person of the next generation is the one who asks questions. We're not that interested, weirdly enough, in answers. We want to elicit questions from our children. And of course, a big part of the Pesach Seder is to keep them awake and alert. And this is an ancient tradition. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Akiva, the leading rabbi of probably all the generations, would bring little nuts, little egos into the table and would hand them to the children who were at his Pesach Seder in order to engage them and keep them excited. Now I say, if I were to try that with my kids and say, hey, have some nuts in order to keep you engaged and excited, they'd say, you're nuts, Abba. We ain't buying this. You need to buy. Okay, so we have to update the toys that we give our kids. But that's what we want. We want them to be engaged in the process. And that doesn't mean giving answers, because we don't always have right answers or good answers. But questions for us are crucial. Actually, the word for wisdom in Hebrew is chokhmah. Chokhmah. And the word chokhmah, wisdom, is different to knowledge, which is da'at. Da'at. What's the difference? Da'at is, I have knowledge, information in my head. Right? But we're not so impressed by that because, books have knowledge in them. The internet's got plenty of knowledge on it. We want wisdom, the ability to discern information in a wise fashion. How do you do that? So it's in the word itself. The word chokhmah is actually 2 words that are stuck together. Koach, ma. What's wisdom? Koach, the power of ma, what? The power to ask questions. That, my friends, is the sign of true wisdom. Asking questions. And that's what we're going to try to do with each of these 4 children in our Pesach Haggadah, and of course with everyone who's at your Pesach Seder. The Haggadah that you're going to read, which is probably the biggest part of your Pesach Seder, it's actually a Torah mitzvah, is not a prayer. It's not there to be speed read. You're meant to actually engage it as a story. It's a sipor, right? Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's a story. And with all stories, there's questions. There's understanding. There's a beginning. There's a middle. There's an end. We want to understand and get the most out of it. Just after you read a book or maybe watch a movie, like, what was really happening over there? Lahavdil is the same thing. We want to engage ourselves in the narrative and the ideas. There's so many questions that can always come out. And that's what this chacham is doing. This child is asking. He's like, oh, what are we doing over here? Why matzah? Why maror? What actually happened in Egypt? And therefore the whole scheme for the chacham, the wise child, is to be engaged in a full way. The rasha, however, we're not so happy with that child. That's the person who asks questions, but not in a skeptical way, in a cynical way. I always say, skepticism, good, healthy. Cynicism, no. And that is the person who's removed themselves to a certain degree. To a certain degree, I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you interested in this? Why are we even doing this? That child, however, is also engaged. And we answer them. And we say, well, you're asking not the right way, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And we engage that student as well. Now, when I grew up, I always thought the rasha was the worst. Right? Everyone said, ooh, who wants to be the rasha? When I grew up with an old German Haggadah, which my family had, and there were these drawings, and the rasha was this egotistical man, right? In classic, it was actually German Haggadah, in German clothing with lederhosen for some reason, right? Full of himself, smoking, right? But actually the rasha is not the worst of the four. Because then we read the tam. And the tam is the simple child. And the tam is simple. It's like mazeh, point to the mutts and says, what is that? And believe me, over the years, I've met many Jewish men and women who were like, wow, that crispy bread, what is that thing? And is that a shofar? Right? Why do we do that? What is that for exactly? When do you sound that? Is that a Pesach thing? Right? Is that a Shavuot? I wish they knew what Shavuot was. Is that a Rosh Hashanah thing? Why is that happening? Why do we do that? I wrote a whole article actually for a newspaper. One of my students that said, shofar, what's that? So the tam is someone who recognizes symbols. We'll see why in a moment, actually. I actually have an answer to that. But is not able to engage in that process. And still, we answer that person with respect and with love. However, the worst of the four, unfortunately, is the enodeh l'shol. And this is the child of the Jew who doesn't even know there's questions to be asked. They are so removed that they don't even understand there is something to be asked. And what do? We feed that child the questions, and then we elicit an answer from them, actually give them the answer ourselves. That's what we do. I want to share with you one idea, which I read from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, a great individual. And he gave over a very unbelievable understanding of these four sons. He says these four sons are not just four sons. They are four generations. A great-grandfather or a great-grandmother, a grandfather and grandmother, a father and mother, and a child, right? A son or daughter. You see, the great-grandfather is always the chacham. If we look back to most people that are watching now, look back to if you met or definitely heard about your great-grandparents, most probably haven't met them, especially following the Holocaust, but you've heard stories of how they were so holy and they lit candles and read Tehillim. Every Sephardi I meet, one of their great-grandfathers was definitely a rabbi. Rabbi in Morocco, rabbi in Poland, right? Always. He was the shochet in town, the chazan maybe, every single one. The great-grandfather, unfortunately, he moves to the new country or dies out. And his son, who's the grandfather, is the rasha. He's like, Dad, what do we need that for, Abba? I'm not interested. Leave it, forget about it. So he rejects his father. If he doesn't fix his ways, he takes on the next generation, right, which is the tam. Now, the tam is the grandson of the chacham. So he's kind of still engaged, because most people have met their grandparents to some degree. And, I remember my grandfather or my grandmother used to talk about this. But why do we do this? What were they doing when they did this? I don't fully understand. Now, if the tam doesn't go back and fix him or herself, then their child becomes an enodeh l'shol, the fourth generation. And unfortunately, you get a 4-generational gap, say the rabbis. The Torah itself actually mentions there's a 4-generational gap, because the enodeh l'shol, most people don't remember their great-grandparents. But their great-grandparent was so far removed that, I heard stories of my grandfather, but my grandfather rejected everything in the new country, in America or Poland, wherever it was, And my father was the Tam. He remembers his grandfather, but he was too far removed. And this fourth generation is now so far gone, they don't even know there's questions to be asked. Unfortunately, we stop there because there is no fifth son. Where is the fifth son? He's off somewhere else. And that's when the Lubavitch Rebbe would say, our job is to go out, out there, and to the four corners of the earth, to every community, find a fifth son, bring them to the table, and reinvent them, and re-educate them, or educate them in the first place, to become the Chacham. That was his thing, right? Because at least these four children are at the Pesach Seder. But the fifth son is not there. And unfortunately, we've seen many times in history, even in Russia, for example, we get to a point where people, not through faults of their own, unfortunately, because of the circumstance of communism, they were so far gone that they went through the four generations, and you ended up with the fifth son who was not even present at the Pesach Seder table, like so many Jews today. And the answer, of course, is to re-engage ourselves, our family, our children, our students, to become the Chacham. To say there's a beautiful heritage. We have a beautiful 3,333 years of amazing Jewish history from Mount Sinai, from the Exodus from Egypt. Just understand, ask questions, let's discuss, let's find out how special and amazing our traditions actually are. Okay, so this takes us, of course, to our Pesach Seder. Now, it's a very unusual name, isn't it? Seder. Seder means order. Order. But if you look at the events of the Pesach Seder, it's actually a complete disorder. There's blood, and there's frogs, and this crazy world, and there's splitting of seas, and then eventually we get to Mount Sinai, and there's thunder and lightning, and the Jewish people hear God directly speaking to them. That does not seem like the ordinary order of events. So why is it called the Pesach Seder when the actual events themselves are extraordinary? And the word Seder means order. And the answer is, one of my teachers said so beautifully, he says, because for us, the Jewish people, the extraordinary is the order. That is our order. The unbelievable events of world history that we have been involved in from the beginning of our days to right now, today, that is the natural order of who we are. The miracles and the amazing events and the unbelievable, and the fact, by the way, the greatest miracle of Jewish history, that we, the Jewish people, are still here after nearly 3,500 years, is itself the greatest miracle of Jewish history, if not world history, and still able to say, we are God's children, and God willing, the Mashiach will come, and we're all headed to the land of Israel that we took over again, thank God, en masse, 70 years ago. So this for us is our order. We are the above the natural order, and that for us is our order. So the word Seder, order of events, actually is a perfect title for who we are and what we, the Jewish people, are all about. And there are 15 steps that we're going to take during the Pesach Seder. We're going to have 2 Torah mitzvot, 5 rabbinic mitzvot that we are going to do at the Pesach Seder. So the Pesach Seder is jam-packed with a lot of stuff going on. We're eating things, we're hearing, we're talking. We said that Pesach is actually 2 words put together. Pesach, the mouth speaks. The mitzvah of this holiday is to speak. And we Jews, we have what to say. So this is your holiday. The number 15 is a very interesting number. It doesn't appear that often in Jewish thought. Now, we mentioned before in numerology, I'm very into numerology, those people who know me, in gematria, but just numbers themselves, even not gematria, letter values, reveal a lot to us. And the number 15 is a very unusual number. What does it represent? Because we're going to see the number 15 appears in different times and different geographical places. And the fact that number 15 occurs in these different things and objects and ideas means those ideas are somehow connected. And the number 15 is rather unique. The number 15 is going to represent something quite important. And what it's going to represent is taking us from one place to another. It's a means to an end. Many other numbers are an ends in and of themselves, like the 10 plagues or the 10 commandments. But the number 15 is not like that. The number 15 is not a destination, it's the journey. Let me explain. We know that in the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, we are told there were 15 steps that would lead into the Beit HaMikdash. That means if you wanted to go into the Beit HaMikdash, you'd have to climb 15 steps. And on these 15 steps were 15 Leviim, 15 Levites, and they would be playing musical instruments and singing beautiful songs. So as you would walk in, you'd be surrounded by these 15 Leviim on these 15 steps as you would walk into the temple. And what songs were they singing? Well, we know, because these 15 songs are printed in Tehillim, in the book of Psalms. King David himself authored and edited the chapters, the 150 chapters of the book of Psalms. And inside there is every song of love and desire we have towards God and our people and the land of Israel. It's all jam-packed in there. 15 of these psalms are called Shir HaMa'alot, songs of elevation, of ascendancy, of going up. And these Leviim, these Levites would sing these 15 songs. You can actually see them today. Every one of the 15 start with Shir HaMa'alot, right? We say one of them, right, during our, when we complete our meals. Okay, so Shir HaMa'alot is a very, very powerful psalm. So 15 is going to represent taking you from point A to point B. It's the journey, it's not the destination. We see also that the name of God is made up of 4 letters. There's a Yud, and there's a Hey, and there's a Vav, and there is a Hey. And these 4 letters, if you split them up, you end up with the first 2 are a Yud and a Hey. And a Yud is 10, and a Hey is 5, which comes to 15. So it's as though 15 is starting off the connection to a full relationship with God, but it's only halfway there. It's taking you part of the way, you're going to have to do the rest. That's number 15. And interesting, those 2 letters are fascinating because God created this world, Olam Hazeh, using the letter Hey. Say the rabbis and the Kabbalists, and the Gemara itself says it. Right? It's actually based upon a word in Bereshit. It says Behi Baram, when I created them. And the Hey in that word is a little smaller, and you can actually read it to say Be Hey Baram. I use the letter Hey to create this world, Olam Hazeh. The letter Yud was used to create Olam Haba, the next world. So the letter Yud is a very spiritual letter. Actually, that's why it's the number 10. It's got a completeness in and of itself. And so the letter Yud is the only letter, my friends, that does not touch the line or pass through it. Every other Hebrew letter either sits on the line or passes through it, like a final nun, for example, okay? But not the letter Yud. The letter Yud is the only letter that actually floats up in the air. It represents Olam Haba, because God used the letter Yud to create the next world, Olam Haba, that awaits us. So we have 2 letters put together, the Yud and the Hey. Yud is the next world, Hey is this world. Together, we now have our mission, our journey to get from this world into the next world. Having said all that, now we know that number 15 represents a journey somewhere else. And it applies here as well. Because in the Pesach Seder, we're going to have 15 parts of the Pesach Seder. Kadei shorchatz karpat yachatz magid rachsa motzi matzah marok arach shulchan arach safon barach halel nirtza. Those 15 are not an end in of themselves. They're taking us from point A to point B. They are the steps that we need to take to do what? Well, on Pesach, to go free. Because you start the Pesach Seder discussing our history of Abraham, who came from an idol worship, actually an idol seller. And we talk about Yitzchak and Yaakov, and how Lavan was an idol worshiper, and he was part of the family who we had to push away, and how our beginnings were challenging physically and emotionally and spiritually, and then things got worse. We ended up in Egypt, and how God redeemed us, and eventually we were saved, and then God took us to Mount Sinai and Dayenu. So that, my friends, is where the Pesach Seder is going to take us. So 15, numerically speaking, as numerology, is always there to take us from point A, from one destination, to another, to point B. And that is where we are taking ourselves, my friends, when it comes to the Pesach Seder. So let's run through these 15 steps because they're actually fun. They're very enjoyable. The rabbis knew exactly how to enliven it. And there are moments that are a little bit more challenging, of course. We remember more difficult times of history. But by the end of the Pesach Seder, when you hit 15, you should be a little bit drunk. If you've had your 4 cups of wine, which we'll talk about in a moment. And you should be happy and elated. And you should be singing songs of joy. Right? The greatest song of joy is Hallel. That you're going to sing right slap bang in the middle of the Haggadah. My friends, it's important. Please listen to me. I know many of you will be doing a Pesach Seder and you'll have the meal. You'll be like, okay, dayenu, we're done. We're off to bed. You're missing the whole point. You've only done steps 7, 8, 9, maybe 10. You've got to get to 15. That's important. So let's work through our 15 steps to make sure that you engage all 15 and you enjoy them. They should be fun. The Haggadah, my friends, is not a prayer. It's a story. It's a narrative. It's our history. It's your history. History of our people. Even a convert, by the way, has to read this story as though they were part of it from the very beginning, though their families probably was not in Egypt. It doesn't make a difference. They've converted. Their soul was in Egypt and redeemed with us, and their soul was at Har Sinai, if they converted. So this is very important. Let's start at the beginning. Kadesh. So Kadesh or Kiddush is the first cup of wine, and we make a Hagafen. And there is a custom, of course, actually it's a halacha, rabbinic one, to lean to our left and drink the wine. And that is how free people, right, get to sit and enjoy themselves, right? Slaves can't sit and relax. They're always on the move. And we are free people on this is Leil Shimurim, a guarded night. We are safe and we get to enjoy. That's Kadesh, the first of the 4 cups of wine that we make. And that should be after nightfall. You begin the Pesach Seder after nightfall. So that's after 3 stars come out. Or if you're following the calendar or timing, which is easier, after Shabbat this year, making the Kiddush. Next comes Urchatz. Urchatz is to wash our hands. Now, this is an unusual washing, because usually when we wash our hands before we eat bread, we wash our hands with a vessel, with a flat top, and we pour the water on our hands twice on each hand if you're Ashkenazic, 3 times if you're Sephardic, and then usually you make a blessing al Untitled Chapter and you eat bread, but we're not eating bread yet. We're eating vegetables. Wet vegetables. In this case, we're going to eat karpas, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's small root vegetable. What's interesting over here, my friends, is that we don't make the blessing al Untitled Chapter. Why not? Couple of reasons. One reason is because we want to freak out our kids, because it's late and we want our kids to be awake and alert, because we want them more than any other holiday. We don't do this on any other Jewish holiday. We want them to stay awake and to listen to the story of our beginnings and give them pride in being Jewish. That is the key word, my friends. Kids should feel a great amount of pride and love and excitement. And if that means giving them gifts, and if that means teaching them how to steal, meaning the afikomen, then you got to do that as well. And promising them things, it's worth it. Invest in your children, your friends, your guests on this night. I remember I used to go to my Rosh Yeshiva, head of my yeshiva, when I was a single student at my yeshiva for many years. And when I go on Shabbat, he would put me, the other students, near him. But on Pesach Seder, he'd put us at the end of the table and have his kids around him. Right? That was the change of focus that came on this night. It's very, very important. So we wash our hands. We don't make a blessing. We also don't speak. And then we walk over and pick up karpas. That's stage number 3. And karpas is a small amount of vegetable. Different customs. Some people have a little bit of an onion, I think, or a little bit of a parsley leaf. Celery is also very common as well. A root vegetable, and you dip it in salt. And the salt water is symbolic of the tears that flowed from our ancestors. And this, I mentioned last night, those who were at Safra or heard the class worth watching, that there's a lot of subliminal advertising and messaging in the Pesach Seder. Just like Amazon design, it's got a smile in it, and the FedEx has the arrow, if you know what I'm talking about. The Pesach Seder is genius subliminal messaging that is getting through to us. with a little salt water and a little bit of matzah, all these things are there to really get inside our heads and to make it a full sense experience of eating, talking, listening, smelling. It's all there and it's all available. So that's what we do. We dip a little bit, we make a hadama, this root vegetable, and we eat it. And karpas actually comes from the ketone pasim, to remember the coat of Joseph, because Joseph, you remember, his coat was taken off him and he was sold. He was the first one of the brothers of the 12 tribes that had to enter into Egypt. And so we have the karpas to remind us of the sale of Joseph and how he had to struggle when he was first put into Egypt before he became the viceroy over there. Step 4 of 15 is yachat. We're going to have 3 matzot on our Pesach table. Why 3? Well, we have 3 forefathers, Avraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. And why 3? Because we have 3 types of Jew. Ashkenazic, Sephardic, I'm kidding. We have Cohen, Levi, and Yisrael. And we take the middle matzah. The 3 matzot must be shalem, whole. We take the middle one and we break it in half. And the bigger piece is taken as is hidden away, tzafun. It's put away and it's hidden, which is going to be eaten later on as the afikomen. The smaller piece, however, you're going to leave inside and you can take a little bite of that a little bit later. So more about that larger broken piece from the middle matzah a little bit later. Okay? But that's the orchat. So once again, this yachatz, rather not orchat, yachatz, that of course is to symbolize how we were broken through the bondage that came. We were shalem, we were whole, we walked into Egypt, but the Egyptian slavery really broke us. And once again, kids don't see that. You're breaking matzah, right? We're teaching kids how to steal things and hide things. That's really, really weird and really freaky. But on this night, this is a different night, and we want to keep the kids engaged, and so it seems to be acceptable to teach and to accept the kids are going to be grabbing the matzah and hide it, or maybe you hide it, the kids have to find it. It's all there to engage the kids. And then begins the biggest step, which is step 5, which is magid, and that is the Torah mitzvah of Veikarta Bencha, of reading the Haggadah to our friends, family, and children. And once again, this should not be some esoteric read. It should be their discussion, to speak, to discuss the story of the Pesach Seder. And you should read it in a language that you understand. So if you don't understand Hebrew, if you're able to read Hebrew, you can read the Hebrew, but you should definitely translate it. And you should follow in the English, because once again, the mitzvah is to tell the story, and it makes no sense to read a story in a language that you don't understand. So the greatest rabbis in history used to have guests at their table who maybe didn't understand Hebrew or no Hebrew, like the Chassam Sofer, and he would read it in German. That's what you got to do. So during the Magid, the recitation and the story of the Haggadah, which talks about the great miracles of our history that happened to us, that itself is a wonderful thing, we have Rachza. Now we wash our hands for the bread, which on Pesach, of course, is matzah. And that is a regular washing. We wash our hands twice on the right hand and twice on the left hand, or 3 times on each if you're Sephardic. You don't speak. The matzah is made a blessing over, 2 blessings over the matzah, rahamotzi and achila matzah, and then everyone should get a little bit of the matzah itself. And you want to have a kazad, you want to have like a nice, a big piece of matzah, okay, at the Pesach Seder, and you want to eat that. Of course, that is eaten leaning like this, okay? You're going to lean in order to eat that matzah, okay? And that's because you're a free person, and you should try to have, at least, that, but try to have a chunky piece of matzah. About 1/3 of a square sheet is usually given as the approximation, if you're able to do it. And the more you eat, I guess the bigger the mitzvah. I know people want to leave room for the regular meal. Tonight you're eating for Hashem. At the Pesach Seder, you're eating for God, and therefore you want to focus on eating your matzah and drinking your 4 cups of wine. Okay? And then you're going to do the rachsa, the motzi, and the matzah mitzvah. And then you have the maror. And the maror are the bitter herbs. And that's to remember the bitter times that the Jewish people went through. And different customs. Ashkenazim, like my in-laws, will take an ounce cup of horseradish, which is enough to make your eyes pop out of your head and your nose to start leaking from that experience. Having said that, That does suffice for Ashkenazim. Sephardim generally will have lettuce. I think any lettuce suffices, usually romaine lettuce. And lettuce is chosen because the more you chew, first of all, you put it in your mouth and it tastes good, but the more you chew on lettuce, the more bitter it becomes, which represents the early days of the Pesach living, which started off, exile, started off not so bad, pretty sweet with Joseph, but ended up very, very bitter. So that's the reason. And we're going to have like a good sized leaf of the maror, and that is our bitter herb of romaine lettuce or horseradish. Then we do the korech, and this actually is a sandwich. Now, according to some things I've read, actually this is the first ever sandwich. Korech actually means to wrap up, because the original matzah was not a crisp bread. It was actually a soft, almost like pita. Okay? And some people today will actually use matzah, some Sephardim, that is soft to touch, like a small pita bread. Actually, I think it could be up to, an inch or two thick, as long as it hasn't leavened and went into the oven before a certain amount of time. And that is going to suffice, that's going to do. And we're going to roll it up, and we're going to put together the mutts and bitter herbs. So the matzah, which represents freedom, and the bitter herbs, which represents the bitterness, we put together as if to say they're one and the same. It was the bitterness of the Egyptian exile that eventually allowed us to get out. So we followed that view of Hillel in order to eat them together. And then there's the festive meal. And it should be a festive meal if you're able to have beautiful plates and a wonderful time drinking and eating. And the conversation shouldn't be about nonsense of this night. The conversation should be about Egypt, about spiritual things, questions about Judaism. Really try to make this one meal or two, if you're outside Israel, into an engaging Jewish experience. Prepare. Write down questions you can ask friends or family. Try to make it a light evening. Don't do politics, my friends. Politics is not to be discussed at the Pesach Seder table. I always say politics is actually two words. Poly, which means many, and ticks are blood-sucking creatures. We don't want to discuss that. The only blood-sucking creature we want to discuss are the lice and the boils. Okay, so after that we have step 12. Number 11 was the meal itself. Don't overeat. You're going to have to leave some room for 2 more cups of wine that you're going to have. And of course, you want to leave a little bit of room for the matzah, the afikomen you can eat at the end. Now we come to the tzafun, which is, tzafun means hidden. And that's the large piece of matzah that was hidden away by you, and you have the child look for it, or you look for it, however you play the game in your respective homes. And so you grab the matzah, and everyone gets a little piece of it, and then adds some more, so they have kazait, a nice bite eating over there. And this is the last food you should be eating. So dessert, anything that should be eaten before this. This is the taste of this should be in your mouth for the rest of the night. Now you're going to have more wine afterwards, of course, and you can drink water or tea, but you should not eat any other food, because the afikomen is actually reminiscent of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb. And the Paschal lamb actually was the last taste you would have in your mouth. So the rest of the night you'd have that taste in your mouth. So instead of the Paschal lamb, we don't have that nowadays. We have a shank bone, as we'll see in a moment, on the table as a zecher, as a remembrance, but we don't eat it anymore until the third temple is rebuilt. So instead we have the afikomen. And afikomen actually is from the Greek, I believe, epikumen, which means the last dessert we're going to have. So the last food you eat should be the afikomen. Take a little bite from that piece that was in the original pile of 3 matzot, then you add some more from regular matzah, and you consume it. And then we have step 13, which is barech, right? You say birchat hamazon, right? We thank God as we do after eating all breads, and then we drink the 3rd cup of wine, making a new blessing of hagefen on the 3rd cup of wine. Then we do hallel. We finish off the Haggadah of singing songs of praise. At this point, should be a little bit wasted at this point, and should be singing happily and very, very joyfully. And finally, nirtzah, the conclusion of it all. And that's really the completion. We've come together after these 15 steps, and now we are free. We've been rejuvenated, we've celebrated, we've sung, we've eaten. It is the perfect Jewish holiday for excitement and celebration. Elijah the prophet came to visit. We went from matzah of slavery to matzah freedom. And that's the excitement that comes with the day itself. On the table, you're going to have a Seder plate called the ka'ara. On it should be a roasted bone. Ideally, it should be an animal bone. It should not be a wing of a chicken. That's not a zeroa, an arm. That is actually a kanafa wing. So you try to get a roasted a bone that's reminiscent of the Paschal lamb, a roasted egg, for two reasons. You have a roasted egg on the Seder plate. That egg should not be eaten. You can eat another egg, which some people do, but it shouldn't be eaten. One reason is it's a sign of mourning. We eat eggs and we mourn. We're still mourning the destruction of the temple. But also there was another korban, another sacrifice called the korban chagiga, that was brought on Jewish holidays, and we eat this egg we have this egg to remind us of that original korban. We have some maror, chazer, bitter herbs. There are some charoset, nuts, apples, wine, and cinnamon that are on the Pesach table as well. The charoset, the delicious, yummy mix that all your grandmothers or maybe grandfathers would make on Erev Pesach. That's very special. The apples are an integral ingredient of that, because actually under the apple trees that the husbands and wives would communicate and be together and were physically intimate in order to keep the generations going. So the apples are a holy sign of the holy Jewish women in whose merit we were redeemed from Egypt, says the Gemara. That is the apples. The apples are very holy to us and very special, and a very big symbol as well that they are eaten. Karpas, a little bit of this root vegetable, and of course matzah is on the table itself. And so, my friends, we've come to the end. We've done 15 steps and we've all gone free. So tomorrow at 12 o'clock, I'll be talking about chametz and why it is poison for our souls on Pesach, when the rest of the year eating chametz is a mitzvah. So that'll be at 12 o'clock. If you're not there, I wish you all a chag kasher v'sameach. May this year be a year of blessing to you and your families. May you all celebrate together with joy in your hearts. May we see the end of all plagues and all diseases. And may we see the coming of the Mashiach, so we'll be able to return to the land of Israel and finally celebrate Pesach with the original Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach, in the third and final temple in Jerusalem, God willing. Wishing you all a wonderful, wonderful Pesach. Thank you for joining.